Well, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday of Passion Week, and I just wanted to bring to you what Jesus was doing just 24 hours now before his death. We know Sunday through Tuesday, Jesus was very public. He was teaching and he was rebuking religious leaders of the day, but he was teaching with such urgency um, to his disciples specifically. Wednesday, he was really quiet. On Wednesday, we don't know anything of really what he did. Does that mean he wasn't doing anything? No, he probably was. But we know that that was the day that Judas made a deal with the religious leaders to betray Jesus. And so that's really unique to know. But Thursday, today, of what Jesus was doing 24 hours, things changed a little bit. Jesus gets a little bit more intimate with his disciples. Now, Passover has started, and that was part of the Last Supper. They were celebrating Passover, which is this wonderful festival where thousands of people would come to Jerusalem and celebrate. Passover was instituted when God delivered Israel out of Egypt hundreds of years prior to this moment in the scriptures. Now we remember the Last Supper as not so much of a celebration, but as a solemn moment of Jesus' last hours with his disciples and his last hours physically prior to the resurrection, right? Well, what we know, and I'm just going to walk through for us and paint the picture of John chapter 13. We know that as they sat down for this meal, Jesus decides to wash the disciples' feet. We've heard this before. We may have washed others' feet in practicing this ritual. Ultimately, the whole purpose and application of this was one thing, was Jesus showing that a Christian life, and a Christian leader even, is one to serve the others. It wasn't unusual for people's feet to be washed in that day. Now, if you were to walk into somebody's house now and the host decides to say, hey, I'm going to wash everybody's feet after dinner, you'd be like, okay, no, but we got to leave a little early. Please don't touch my tingers. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't want people touching your feet. I'm telling you, that's not a normal thing for us to experience. but it was more normal. Why? Well, because the roads were dusty. You didn't have really enclosed shoes, and so in sandals, what happens. It gets really dirty. So it would just be courteous to keep your feet washed as you walk into a home or to a place. And the unique part of this whole story is that usually you would not have someone of prominence washing somebody else's feet. It would be more of a servant's job. And so we get this idea that Jesus is changing their idea of what a leader is, what a Christian looks like. And it is someone who serves others, and specifically one another. That's what we're supposed to look like. Well, he continues on and he begins to talk about how he is going to be betrayed. Now, I want to set the scene here the best I can. The table that they would be sitting at looks a little bit different than what we know and what we'd expect today. It's not a table where you sit in chairs and you sit around each other in some square, rectangular, or circular table. It was actually something that kind of looked like a half square. Not so much, but you follow me here. It's kind of like, really, it was kind of like this, right? It was kind of like this, where people would sit on one side and they'd sit on the outside of this all the way around. Now, the person of prominence that would be sitting around this table would be the number 2 person inside. He would be at the center. He'd be number 2 in. The first person would be almost like one of the most trusted people to the prominent person. So it would be like the cupbearer, kind of the food tester, to make sure there's nothing going on with it. And so you have that, and then everybody after that, okay, from greatest to least. And so this is what the Last Supper looked like. People weren't sitting on the inside of the table. They were sitting on the outside, and they would be eating. Now, an interesting conversation happens during this time. Jesus begins to tell them that one of the 12, one of the people sitting around this table, was going to betray him. It's such a unique thing. And so I want to set the scene for what it looks like. And I want to just ask you to consider this. What we know is that Jesus, as he was sharing, that John was encouraged to lean upon Jesus to ask him who specifically was it that was going to betray him. Well, knowing how they would sit, they would be around this table, right? And they weren't sitting at chairs. They were actually leaning on one arm, particularly the left arm. They were using that as the support, and they would be eating with the right, and their legs would be out. So that's how they would be doing, and they would lean kind of on each other. So we actually know if Jesus is the second one in, the man of prominence, then John would be at the first seat, and he would lean back on Jesus and whisper, "Who is it that is going to betray you?" And Jesus says, "The one I dip the bread in and hand it to." And so we know that if there's no one on the other side of the table, John is right next to him. So where is Judas? Judas is the one Jesus is leaning on right behind him, because that's the only reach he could bring to. He's handing it to Judas right here. And so isn't it interesting that Jesus decides to place Judas right next to him? I would think that maybe Peter or James or somebody would be next to Jesus. But no, it was Judas, the one who betrayed him. Isn't it interesting, Jesus' grace and love even to his betrayer? Isn't it interesting who he allows next to him? And I just want you to consider this beautiful scene, and it's just hours before Jesus is betrayed. And so I want you to think about it, and I would love to hear some of your thoughts and your responses and what God is speaking to you through this devotion. So go ahead and comment below. Talk to you soon.